"A foul enemy of ours has been brought into this place," shouted Reverend Vigil Wood. "If this were a synagogue, would you have invited Adolf Hitler?" The crowds roared no. "Is Mrs. Hicks interested in our children?" "No." "Go home, Mrs. Hicks," the crowd chanted. "Get out, get out, get out." Louise Day Hicks, the lady these words were directed at, sat on stage and ignored the people who seemed to hate her. But how did these people begin to feel this way about her? So much hate, but why? In June 1966, when this scene took place, Boston was in the midst of a protest against the integration of public schools. The NAACP claimed that Boston schools were segregated. Louise Day Hicks, the chairwoman of the school board, refused to admit that they were indeed segregated. So resistant was the school board through the 1960s, and so unwilling to follow state law that mandated that segregated schools be integrated, that the NAACP eventually had to sue in federal court in the early 1970s. In 1974, a federal judge ruled that the Boston public schools were intentionally segregated and in response ordered for students to be bused to achieve integration. This then led to riots and protests against integration. Louise Day Hicks, who was by this time a member of the Boston City Council, provided a sense of victimization for the poor whites who were being forced into busing. She led them to believe that busing was unfair and unjust, and therefore should be protested. But she hadn't always been against segregation. When the NAACP originally proposed desegregation, she had seemed sympathetic to their argument. It came as a surprise to those who know her well when she changed her stance to against segregation. Louise Day Hicks went to college after her father's death and studied to become a teacher at Wheelock College. Later, she studied law at Boston University and took and passed her bar examination in 1956. She later became the chairwoman of the Boston School Committee in 1961. Shortly after her views changed with the NAACP. At Boston University, Louise had many black friends, which brings up the question, why did her views change so drastically? It seems that Louise Day Hicks changed her views on integration as a political move. When people seemed to respond negatively to the idea of integration and busing, she came out against it. As chairwoman, elected in 1961, her main priority was gaining people's support. By rejecting the need to integrate schools, even as it was occurring throughout a federal order, many whites began to follow Louise and trust her as their leader against integration. She never really came out to say that she was against integration, but she developed a slogan saying, "You know where I stand." People knew where she stood, and white segregationists wanted to stand with her. Those who tried to shoot her down, calling her a racist, were met with the clever resorts such as, "I'm not against segregation, I'm just against busing." By not specifically labeling herself a racist, it helped her position politically as well as socially. She once said, "I never think of people as Negro or white. Boycotts and other actions have drawn a color line in our schools that never existed before." This statement put the violence and rioting of the people on the shoulders of the NAACP instead of on Hicks. While Louise continued to be against busing, the NAACP was trying to desegregate the Boston schools. Before busing, both blacks and whites in South Boston went to poorly maintained schools. However, the black students had it even worse. This was unfair to the black students, along with the even lower class, non-wealthy white students, and Hicks tried to hide it by saying that it was not an issue. She fought the NAACP on their stands, and she encouraged whites to fight out against desegregation and busing. She encouraged their rage and told them to do something about it. Hicks became the Bull Connor of Boston, but did so in a very covert way. Her words sparked a fire inside of people, and when busing eventually and inevitably came to Boston, people reacted. She eventually was able to ride this popularity to the U.S. House and the Boston City Council. By 1970 in Boston, Louise Day Hicks was no longer the chairwoman and was no longer part of the school committee. By this time, she was a member of the Boston City Council. When Hicks was on the school committee, she influenced her followers to stand up and protest, to put a stop to integration, hoping that their protest would stop the busing. However, busing started in 1974, and she no longer had control over the people she had once instructed to protest. She had tried to stop the people and tell them that violence was not the answer, but once the fire was lit, there was no way to put it out. She had no control in Boston anymore, and could only sit back and watch the people fight with the ideas she had given them. While in Hicks's heart, she was probably not a racist. Her political strategy was to use racism people felt as an overall political tool that would assist her in becoming popular among the people of Boston.